Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. Welcome to episode 6 of the Convo. Thank you for joining us tonight. We've got a good episode for you in store, inshallah, on the topic of our charities making poverty history. We're looking at the question of these not-for-profit organizations and charities, a little bit of the sort of non-Muslim charities out there, World Vision and others, and we're looking more so at Islamic charities, not any charity in particular, but the concept of charity and what role charity has to play in solving some of the big questions and the big issues, social and political issues that we face in our times today. Obviously, the world every now and then is rocked by a big political crisis, such as the one that hit Beirut not long ago, or such as long civil wars, such as the one that's been affecting Syria for the longest time now. We want to question and we want to sort of look at the role that charities have to play in the context of these long-term issues, and how significant a role can they play in alleviating these issues. So inshallah, after the break, join us for this very interesting and timely topic.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Convo. Sufyan opened it up for us. He let us know exactly what we're going to be talking about today. And to bring a start to the discussion, I wanted to just mention briefly the goal of charity organizations. But before I do, just a quick preface, a quick disclaimer. We're not here at all in any capacity to belittle or degrade charity organizations or their efforts. That is absolutely not the point tonight. We just wanted to look at them within a broader context, a broader framework, and just sort of interrogate and question the circumstance. Yeah, the direction, yes, but also just the circumstances within which they exist, where their objectives take us, how critical they are, or perhaps not, or just a whole host of things, right? And just sort of really asking those questions, because alhamdulillah, our community is phenomenally charitable, right? I'm sure we've all gone to those fundraising dinners. I'm sure we've all gone to those. We've attended that khutbah where at the end of it, you know, there's been a mass appeal for a particular issue and everyone's emptied their pockets, and we've all heard the narrations of how, you know, you give with one hand such that the other doesn't know, all that kind of thing. And our community is really, really charitable, alhamdulillah. But we just wanted to highlight exactly how we should be thinking about these charities. So again, we're not here to belittle or degrade or anything of the sort, but just to contextualize and just to sort of shed light on some areas of charities and the discussions around that probably isn't had as much as it could be in the community.
I think there's a number of forums that the community could see organized on this topic. So, you know, like you said, people in the Muslim community is very charitable.
Yeah.
And causes which invite our charity are also innumerable.
Yeah.
Heaps of if you look at both ends of the equation, you've got, you know, as I said in the intro, that you've got to, you know, every now and then I suppose the most common or the most commonly occurring qualities and events in the Muslim world, right, are ones that are deeply troubling. Deeply problematic.
It says a lot about
conflict,
the sorry state.
Right, wars, you know,
famine
and other problems which cause long-term issues where then the charity is invited. So on the one hand, you've got a condition that is inviting charity, and on the other hand, you've got a community, by and large, which is
really,
very
really
charitable. So I think somewhere there, are we losing focus on some potentially key issues?
It's a really
where is that money going, and what can we do with that money?
It's a really interesting dynamic that you point out, though, that you got charitable population plus a huge amount of charitable causes. It's like this unfortunate match made in heaven. Like it's just that we so want to give and we're so encouraged to give, and there's just so much to give to that we just almost transition to this giving mode. In fact, not even transition, we're just consistently in this giving mode without really asking some broader questions that would really get us to interrogate the purposes of the giving. Like you mentioned, there's all these causes, right? All these things. But if we stop and just have a brief look at what exactly the causes are, the vast majority of them are man-made causes. They're brought about by particular circumstances at the hands of certain parties due to certain issues and politics and whatever else. And so it's really critical that we look at that as well. Like, is throwing money going to solve the problem?
Yeah. So look, with charities, I think you can divide a lot of the charity work into short-term and long-term.
Yeah.
So short-term, some of the examples I was giving, like some disaster hits some city somewhere in the Muslim world. It doesn't have to be Muslim world.
Anyway,
we can look at, crises.
Bushfires, for example.
Yeah, bushfires in Australia, right? And there's sort of a short-term issue has occurred. It invites immediate charity. It invites immediate relief work.
Yeah.
That's one category. And I think we'll address that separately. But I think the bigger issue that we want to look at more so in this podcast is the other brand of charity, which is sort of this ongoing long-term charity to help solve systemic issues. These UN sustainability goals of eradicating poverty, establishing livelihoods and reconnecting communities and that sort of stuff. I think because it's not just, when you give to a charity and, again, not discouraging people in any way. We all give, subhanAllah, I give to charities, and I wouldn't have that any other way, right? But I think we should question, and there are a lot of questions, right, about how effective are some of these charities in solving some of their own purported purposes.
Yeah. Let's just look at the purposes. Let me ask you a question, right? Are you seriously suggesting that? Okay, you mentioned the UN and all that. Let's turn your eyes now to local Muslim community charity organizations. Are you suggesting that they claim that they're going to eradicate poverty? Or, okay, maybe that's a little too ambitious, but are they claiming to solve systemic issues? Like, is that what they actually claim?
There are. So some of this some of the research to this podcast, World Vision. I'll turn to the Muslim organizations in a little bit, but without mentioning names. But World Vision, which is a massive one, all growing. All of us growing up saw ads of that on TV. Sponsor a child and this and that. They have in their own mission statement, and I will quote because I don't want to get this one wrong. It says. We recognize. Sorry, here. Let me just get the.
They're a Christian organization.
Christian organization. I just want to get. I don't want to misquote them. That would not be very helpful at all. Here we go. So World Vision says it aims to engage people to quote eliminate poverty.
Yeah.
Okay, straight out of the horse's mouth. Okay, there are other charities out there, which sort of speak to something similar about strengthening, quote, humanity's fight against poverty and social injustice, right? Now, obviously, that's using a different kind of language. It's not talking about eliminating poverty, but I think there's still questions to be asked. It raises obvious questions. Can charities eliminate poverty? And even if we lower the bar a little bit, can they play a significant role in the fight against charities, right?
Fight against poverty.
Or the fight against, not the fight against charities.
That would be
the fight against poverty.
Self-destructive.
The fight. To be honest, there's actually talks that in the research for this podcast, I came across a talk on a TEDx talk in which a guy was up on stage, and the title of the talk was saying, it said, to end poverty, end charities. Right? So you got crazy ideas out there. That's not exactly what we're here arguing tonight, but again, let's have a chat around that. Let's look at some of the stats, some of the figures.
But let's go back down. So, okay, first of all, let's explore the question: can charity end poverty? Can it happen? Like, if let's say all the billionaires and millionaires around the world got together and they raised a ton of money, put it all together and said, this is our end poverty fund. Use it all to end poverty. Is that going to solve the issue?
Well, when you say use the money, it's not that simplistic. And actually, it's a good way, it's a good simplistic way to highlight a much more sophisticated problem. Because when you say, oh, here you go, here's money, use it.
Who's going to use it?
It assumes there's not a whole bunch of other questions saying who's going to use it, where are they going to use it, how are they going to use it,
where's it going to go to,
where's it going to go,
how they're going to prioritize where it should go, what causes are deserving, what aren't.
So if you can allow me to answer your questions and answering your own questions, asking the questions and answering them.
It's a two-way thing. That's why it's called the Convo.
Yeah. So if you allow me to have this conversation,
we can rename it to the monologue if
Thank
Sufyan
you,
just wants
tech
to keep
guy,
talking.
for that sound effect.
Appreciate it.
So, to answer, it's a really good question actually. So
you mentioned that already, but you go ahead.
It's ask the question if can we solve poverty, establish a massive fund and just hand out money, but it doesn't answer all those other important questions. And if you use that as a sort of like a symbolic, like or a microcosm of a bigger issue, it's exactly that. It's that there's this assumption that it's quite simplistic. It's just a financial mismanagement. Oh, you chuck more money here and you solve the problem. But it's actually, decades of economic mismanagement, which has now become political in nature.
Yeah.
You've got conflicts which perpetuate that poverty, right? You've got corruption, which doesn't allow the money to trickle down 100%. To people who need it. And sometimes that comes in the form of like your typical sort of corrupt dictators in the Muslim world. But sometimes, even your Ozpol and even your, these organizations that are responsible, arms of the government that are responsible, and they say, no, money that's going to be sent to Syria is going to be deemed money that is going into, quote, the wrong hands.
Yeah.
Right?
And they can dictate what's legit, what isn't.
So when I say corruption is not going to allow the money to go through, I don't just mean your typical sort of dictator in the Muslim world. I mean, there's a whole framework of processes and laws that will prevent money from trickling down.
So let me now answer my own question.
Yeah. So what do you think the answer to your question is?
No worries. So look, you can't throw money at it and assume it's going to solve the issue. And I think it comes back down to politics. It really does. It comes back down to, as you were saying, who controls it, where does it go, all that kind of thing. And let's look at, I was thinking about 3 particular categories, right? Let's look at the Muslim world, or sort of, you can call it the East, quote unquote, the West, that's 2. And then, because it's the one that's consistently advertised as being impoverished, Africa as a continent.
Yep.
If we just consider Africa on its own, arguably, and probably, I think it's safe to say, the most impoverished place on earth, right? And that's where all those World Vision ads are filmed, right? To sponsor an African child, all that. All right, we've all seen it. Africa's problem isn't that they had a lack of resources. It's not that they didn't have enough food. It's not that they didn't have enough money. It's just that everything that they had was ripped and torn out of their continent and thrown into other places, into the bank vaults of wealthy capitalists and so forth. So it's not like they didn't have the food. It's just that the food was taken from their mouths and placed in other places. And so the issue wasn't that they didn't have it. And so you could throw a truckload more money there, but if those channels and those facilitations and those procedures are still there, then once again, it's just going to end up back in the wrong hands, back where it shouldn't be going. It's not going to address the actual core issue. And then on top of that, you've got governments that are installed to make sure that system stays as it is. And then you move from Africa to the Muslim world, and you've got the ridiculous wealth of a certain class that are given that wealth purely for the purposes of making sure that they remain in power and impose the policies that the Western world wants for them to have. There are particular, not the Western world entirely, but particular Western governments who run the show in the background that they want them to sustain. So if you look at the UAE, for example, they've got even Saudi and so forth, the Gulf countries, ridiculous amounts of wealth, but Muslims who are meant to be their brothers, right, who come from the subcontinent to work there are living in horrendously dire, impoverished conditions. And that's not because they don't have what the people need. It's not because they don't have the money. It's because it's going in one particular direction. And move to the West.
I wanted to point out that there's a rising voice out there. There's a bunch of people who have spoken, who have written. I just want to read out some of these titles, right? Adam Lee Brown, quote, "Does giving to charities do more harm than good?" Kirk Bowman, "The world doesn't need another not-for-profit." Eric Stowe, "How to kill your charity. Yes, that's a good thing." Right? and then some people in their articles and in their writings on this issue have quoted some older scholarly voices. 19th century political economist Henry George. "The path to ending poverty is to bring about an end to privilege under our systems of law and taxation."
Yeah.
So without getting into details of what he's talking about,
it's policy,
it's the politics
law,
of it, right?
Systems.
Scottish political economist, my last geeky quote, sorry guys, Patrick Edward Dove, "The need for charity is a consequence of monopoly privilege." So they're all sort of pointing to this idea that, okay, yes, they're not mentioning it here. I'm sort of, this is an appendix of my own, but if you sort of look at a short-term issue, and yes, you need to give some money to a short-term cause, go ahead, give it. But the long-term one, I think questions need to be asked. I think more importantly, it's not about, oh, don't give your money here because it's not solving. It's about, let's have a conversation. That's what this podcast is about, right? Let's establish points in which we need to take the conversation further and maybe even open up channels of this conversation within the community where,
for sure.
with charities, like let's involve charities in this conversation as well. Have an honest look. Some of the charities out there have been very open as of late. I think after some of the stuff that's happened with Red Cross earlier in the year with the bushfire appeal, some celebrities saying that they're not going to give money to the Red Cross because big dramas around, I think it was 40% of the money that they had raised. And in the case of the 40% for Red Cross, and it was 46% for the Salvation Army, up till May, which was a point until which the fires had been ravaging for months. They had only spent 40% of the funds that they had raised for the bushfires. A lot of it had gone on admin fees, and there was speculation around that. So there's big questions around that. But I think after that period, a lot of Muslim charities sort of published their details as well, and they've been quite open even before then about some of this
it's
stuff.
important that there's accountability because people need to know.
There's a change in that. There's a change in that voice, but I think it'd be good to involve some of these charities, involve some important imams, important voices in the community, and come together and have a forum about what role is our charity actually playing in solving some of these long-term problems.
Look, I think if we were to have a chat with some Muslim charity organizations and their representatives, look, I would hazard a guess that they wouldn't come out guns blazing and say, we're going to end poverty. I think, look, it's a fairly non-controversial position to suggest that charity is not going to end the problems. But the thing is that we put the short-term stuff aside. We'll leave that aside for the time being. But even like mid-term stuff, like not long-term, but even mid-term, like to assist with development, to help set up things and sort of an interim kind of vague ideal.
I know you love throwing random questions at me. I want to try and play that devil's advocate type thing here. Let's say you are a deputy commissioner of some charity. I don't know if that's the title they use these days, but
they have deputy commissioners.
I don't know,
I thought that was for the police force, but okay.
Deputy chairman, right? Is that better?
No worries.
Okay, let's do chairman.
Let's just be chairman.
Okay, you are chairman, Hamza Qureshi, of
Promotion. Instant. Awesome.
National Appeal Fund.
The National Appeal Fund for Human Improvement and Ending Poverty.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
No, so honestly, so you're this representative, right? And you've come onto this forum and you're sitting on a panel, and I ask you this question, right?
Yeah, sure.
I say, no, seriously. I say to you, is anything that you're doing today using our money to solve the long-term problems of the Muslim world? What would your response to that be?
Look, okay, I'm going to put my CEO hat on or whatever it was. Whatever.
Chairman, buddy. Deputy hat, Commissioner, right? Man.
Deputy Commission, Chairman, CEO of World Poverty and whatever. That's my official title. Okay. What I would say in response to that would be not directly. So what we do as a charity, we intend to distribute the funds that you and others like yourself have given to sustainable developmental projects that can assist for people to create scenarios where they are not in long-term poverty. It can lift them out.
Phone. Can you grab my phone? Yeah.
It can lift them out of the dire state that they're in. However, we do recognize. Now, this is me speculating, right? But I assume they wouldn't go this far. But ideally, in an ideal world, they say, but we recognize that the issues at their core are political issues, and so we lobby for political
Okay, so that's a really diplomatic answer. Let me take you to the point of it, right? Let me ask you this, right? So I just want to grab my phone because I've got some questions for you on this.
All right.
Yeah. Look, let's talk about Syria. You're saying that
Okay,
you're
go
going
ahead.
to solve some long-term problems and sustainability and development, community connection, blah blah blah. Not to belittle your objectives in this organization, but Syria has been ravaged by war, right? So let's go back before 2011, before this crisis has hit Syria. It's not good, but it's obviously not as bad as it is now. And I'm asking you the question in that context, right? But then the war happens and 11 years pass. And infrastructure's been flattened, the economy's been destroyed, and people have died in their millions. And I ask you, where did all your goals of ending poverty in Syria go?
So we understand that within the context of a civil war, there is going to be immense problems. We're going to face enormous challenges, and no one is pretending that a civil war situation is simple to deal with. However, under that context, we have to do the best we can. So we've been developing projects, we've been assisting communities in being sustainable. We've been doing all that jazz, right? We've been doing it all. But come one bomb and our efforts are gone.
Okay, you need to build a little bit of intellectual stamina into what you're saying, all right? If you're going to represent the chairman.
No, but look, it's difficult for me to take that position because I agree with you.
But try not to. Try and push a point.
Okay, but
it was almost powerful what you said.
No, but the thing is,
but there was so much power. I felt like the power was being redirected from the lights into like what you were saying. The lights were dimming from how powerful.
It's unsustainable. Like the thing is, I could say that, right? But then the counter is just so obvious that I built, our organization, our charity built for a local village, or not village, a small city. It built some infrastructure. It tried to create some jobs. It gave people some raw materials so they could, fashion some products out of it and then sell them. But then war came and just destroyed it all. What can you possibly say in response to that?
And the thing is that it's not like, Syria is the one place where war happened. Like Afghanistan was ravaged by war.
It's everywhere.
Iraq was ravaged by war. Syria was ravaged by war.
That goes back to the point that we were initially mentioning. That all these issues affect, like the vast proportion of them, in fact, almost all of them, are caused by political man-made issues. And if the problems are man-made, like the people there are constructing the problems, then it's those people, those systems that they represent, that need to be taken care of. And putting money there isn't going to do it. It just is not going to do it. But I think it is also worth mentioning that if, we'll go back to your situation, right? The Syrian situation, you got a family that's starving, right? And you've got the chance to give them something to help out. I'm not going to look at that family and say, look, I'm not going to give you any money because the problem is systemic.
Of course.
I'm going to redirect my funds or my attention to a systemic methodology of some sort, and I'm going to try to address it that way. Once that's all good, then your problems will be solved. Theoretically true, but you got to help them out.
Bro, honestly, I could flip that around. You're saying a family in Syria is in need of financial support.
Yep.
So you're not going to go to them and say, well, because this charity of mine is not going to end poverty, therefore I'm not going to give you the money. Yeah. I could flip that and say the families in Syria, as we know them today, are actually they are dying.
Yep.
They're on the verge of death constantly. So it's the other way around. You have an orphan, a Syrian orphan, who's calling for you to sort of, rescue him and rescue his family and, send an army to protect them, physically protect them. And he'd be insulted if you were to throw pounds or dollars at him.
No, I agree.
It's a very interesting
and in fact, there's
sort of
people from there that would say that. We don't just need your dollars here. We don't just need the food. We need the food, but we also need for the ummah to get together and to bloody do something to solve our issue.
Yep.
And I think that's where that it would have been great if we had this meme up. That taco ad, why can't we have both?
Why can't we do both? Yeah.
Why can't we do both? I think that's what it effectively boils down to. But the problem is, and this is in my estimation anyway, that our community doesn't really take the approach of let's do both. Our community kind of looks at it in a one-sided fashion and is pacified by donating. Like if someone hears about the issues in not just Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, Iraq, Palestine, wherever on earth it is in the Muslim world, unfortunately, you're going to find all these multitudes of issues. And if they think, okay, I've got to do something about this, then the first and often, unfortunately, the only thing they're going to do is reach into their pockets, take out their wallet, and then, donate online, with their bank card, or hand over the cash, put it in the masjid box or whatever. And often that's it. End of story. And that issue is gone from their minds. That concern is now satisfied. I've done my job. I've helped someone out. My money's going there. And that's it. End of story. And I think that's where there's a far,
I don't know, is it fair? Like, I know, yeah, can we get calls? Our tech guy's asking if we can advertise calls. I'm totally cool with that. Can anyone who was planning on calling in towards the end, feel free to call us, interrupt us. We'll take your call. The number should be up on the screen in very camouflaged font.
Maybe we can move that up to the top of the screen or something. Or something like that, yeah.
And it will be on our Facebook as well, so you can sort of check out our number there, give us a buzz, see what you think. I wanted to challenge Mr. Qureshi here as well on his opinion, because he was saying that people give money and they feel pacified. Maybe as a community, but like I think most individuals, to be fair, like let's be intellectually honest about it, I think people don't think that $50 that they're giving is like sort of going a long way to solve a lot of problems and that they've done their job. It's just kind of like,
I get you, but what they then think, again, I'm projecting here. I could be wrong. Feel free to challenge me, which you already have multiple times, but it's all good. I feel like they think that I've done what I can do. This is the most tangible, realistic, hands-on, so to speak, even though it's not really hands-on at all.
I work, I get money into my account. I can't think of anything else except taking as much of that money as I can and giving it on to someone who needs it more than me.
Often would be the next step. Like the next step to that would be, okay, well, if they're really dedicated, I'm going to go visit a place. I'm going to go to a place and
maybe report about it.
Or not just, mainly it's like, I'm going to go there and actually hand out the stuff myself rather than just giving money to an organization. But that's it. Like it happened with the bushfire stuff as well. There were Muslim community charities and so forth, and charities generally, where they were going to rural communities, handing out support packs and food and whatever else it was that they were able to do. And many charities in the Muslim community, they will go on trips to those places and actually physically give out and then send photos back of what people's donations have done. But again, that's for someone who's particularly dedicated and wants to do a little more. They'll go that extra mile. But again, that extra mile is deeply connected to the whole mode of charity, which is to just give something. It doesn't address what we've said. It doesn't address systematic issues. It doesn't address any of that lingering background that's just going to make whatever issues are consistent and enduring.
I think, how at the start we said there's a lot of charitable causes out there. And Islam encourages us to be incredibly charitable. And again, no one should take from this podcast the idea that, we're against charity work or that we're not charitable people or we don't encourage people to be charitable people. It doesn't mean that we're against the quality of giving, because that is an inherent quality in Islam.
Every Muslim should have that.
Tell you for the record now, we are encouraging that you give. We want to help people when they are struggling financially. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of the most charitable people, following the footsteps of Abu Bakr radiallahu an, who gave all of his wealth. He donated all of his wealth, right, to the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, the rest of the Sahaba, all following the footsteps of the Prophet sallallahu were very, very charitable. But there's a question. In Mecca, when the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba saw a society which was suffering from gross economic imbalances. I remember reading when I was studying in Medina, there was a book, Sirat ibn Ishaq, I think it's one of the Sirah books. It says in there, sorry, I don't know if it was in that book, but the point is, one of the Sirah books that we read there, it said that the majority of the people of Mecca were fuqara, were poor, whilst the whilst the leaders of the Quraysh ate in plates of gold and silver.
Oh, wow. SubhanAllah.
So that gross economic imbalance, it's not something that the Prophet ﷺ was not accustomed to or that he hadn't seen. But were there efforts in Mecca to establish charity organizations?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And you know, and someone might ask, well, you know, he established a state within 13 years and he was able to then reinforce the ideas or reinforce the political messaging or carry out actions as a political statesman that we're not able to do because a long time has elapsed. And so we need to address these causes. But there's still some underlying issues, which is that none of the Sahaba would ever accept to throw money but not be part of the political campaign that the Prophet ﷺ was asking them to be a part of. Right? They would never accept that. So I think that no one should accept to be part of, right, either physically part of this or even in your thinking that, look, I'm going to dedicate myself to charity work to solve the problem, which you know is at the core of it, it's a political issue. It's a political problem.
Address it as a political issue as well.
And so what needs to be done, I think, is something more. I would very much like to see charities take on a political voice, but you know what?
100%.
You know what the problem is there? I don't know if you're aware of it, but subhanAllah, one of the things I was reading online when I was researching it, some brothers on Facebook commenting,
to be like apolitical.
They have to be apolitical.
Which is so ridiculous.
And get that. So let's look at that dilemma there, right?
That's ridiculous.
So the Australian government, through its Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Register, and then also if you look at other governments like the UK Charity Commission, it says that, and I'm going to quote here again, I don't want to get this one wrong because, you know, don't want to misquote arms of the Australian government. That'd be a very terrible thing to do. Knock, knock. Just to get this right again, it says charity regularly publishes, it gives an example of charities and stuff that they can't do. And it gives an example. It says, for example, a charity regularly publishes material by new writers advocating anarchy and the end of democratic government. Such a pattern of conduct may demonstrate a purpose of promoting activities that are contrary to public policy. So just that point, if you advocate, they're not saying you take up arms, right? But they're saying if you advocate against democratic government, you are not allowed to operate as a charity. You are engaging in unlawful activity, and that can disqualify your charity completely.
It's funny. They say that you know, it's got to be apolitical. Effectively, they're saying here that, look, if you're a charity, take politics out of it. And it's just so ridiculous. It's like, guys, the problem is a political problem.
It's a political issue.
And you're asking us to solve it by being apolitical.
Absolutely.
And then on top of that, the incredible hypocrisy will be when the government comes in and will take inevitably political positions and channel and encourage for donations or support or things to go or aid to go in one direction or the other. So they will make a political call and they will say our aid goes here or there. Now, obviously, they're not doing it for the betterment of people or to alleviate poverty. They're doing it for their own selfish interests. But hey, government's allowed to be political and will decide who can and can't be. And hey, charity can't be political.
And the fact that all the charities, all of them, I don't care if it's run by a Muslim organization or a non-Muslim Christian, whatever, all of them are managed by the Australian government.
Yeah, and they have to.
And obviously, now get this, like you said, right? But in another way, the Australian government, deeply political. It's a government, right? Their bread and butter is politics. They get to decide on the basis of their political decision making where our money goes and how much of it goes, and if it's allowed to go through. But the ones that are raising it are not allowed to campaign on political bases. So deeply contradictory. And I think that is, you know, one of the conversations I really feel needs to happen within the community. You know, and it raises the question, would you rather be a part of an organized effort to raise funds and absolve yourself and give up your right to campaign politically? Or would you rather give up your right to organize funds in an organized manner, but actually
retain the ability
to campaign on a political basis? So, you know,
what's really interesting is how the issue with Syria, when the Syrian civil war was starting, and then it got ferocious, subhanallah, and the Muslim community is really, really feeling it here, right, and across the world. And as always, charity became a really big thing, and it were like all the organizations were doing Syria drives and charity and this and that. And obviously the sentiment was deeply positive that the Muslim community wanted to assist their brothers and sisters in Syria. But that became such a political quagmire that it just became really difficult to actually direct funds with, and especially because there were very clearly separate warring factions. You had the Assad regime, and you had, those who were fighting against it, and then where does your money actually go? And the organizations would have to consistently make clear that we are not funding these groups that are fighting. We are funding this, only this. This is where your money is going, so on and so forth. And it got so severe that the government had to come in and enact anti-terror legislation to say that if your money inadvertently even goes to those who are fighting, whichever side they say, whichever side, but that's garbage, right? It meant for the Muslims who are fighting against the Assad regime.
Yep.
They said if you inadvertently fund them, so even by accident, you send your money to an organization, but it ends up with them, you could be liable. Now, what is that other than a massive scare tactic?
Yeah.
Like, don't give there. Don't give in that
direction. And you know what? That's the Australian government. But when I was studying in Medina, subhanAllah, the Saudi government did the same thing. It says, whoever funds madiyan or ma'nawiyan. It says whoever supports the Syrian mujahideen, whether financially, or they went one step further. They actually went one step further. They said, you know what, we want to outdo the Western governments. They said financially, or they said figuratively, in meaning. And what they meant by that was by dua even. If you were to stand up on a pulpit and support, right, that would commit a crime against it was a royal decree that they passed while I was there. This is back in 2014. So subhanAllah.
Another question for you now.
Sure.
All right. So we've spoken about long-term stuff, we've spoken about short-term, but hey, we still want to donate, right? And it's all good. We should, and as we said, we encourage all of us to donate. Who do we donate to then? Obviously not names or anything, but what principles can we try and keep in mind such that we're doing the best we can in a tough environment? What can we do?
I think two things. One, I mention principles that have been mentioned by others or have been advertised by certain charities that I don't necessarily agree with. And I want to put a position forward of my own as well. Personally, what I believe. In terms of positions that have been put forward, there are organizations out there, again, without naming them, that have said things like, keep your zakat local. Massive ads, right, on billboards saying, keep your zakat local. Honestly, when I see ads like that, I cannot for the life of me think how that's justified, because there are brothers who have suggested that there is some element of evidence that you should take care of your immediate, right,
those who are around you.
But as an ummah, do we want to really encourage nationalism in that way, where we are feeding into the same mentality that says that when a crisis happens in Syria and Australia, the Australian one will feature on the front page and the Syrian one will be in the world news section on page 56. Do we want to feed into that mentality and say, it's a local crisis, so keep your money local?
Imagine every Muslim country, or every country, let's go Muslim, right? Every Muslim community, let's say, around the world said, keep your zakat, keep your money local, keep your charity local. Every single one of them said that. We'd be entirely disconnected from assisting each other.
That's right.
And the thing is, entirely localized.
The money, the direction of the money, it's not like the majority of the cash flow is coming from the Muslim world to the Western world. It's the other way around. Right? To the point that even prime ministers like Imran Khan are making appeals to his supporter base in foreign countries like Canada, Britain, America, Australia, and he's sort of relying on that because the cash flow is meant to go the other way, right? But subhanallah, at that, he's just held up a sign saying 40 minutes. He's telling me to shut up. But subhanallah, if the cash is going that way, such a good point, right? It's like the cash is going from the Western world to the Eastern world, right? And if we're asking the Western world to say, no,
sorry, we're going to keep it here.
Keep a zakat local. I don't know if that's a...
Let me interrogate that. But we do have a multitude of issues locally that desperately require attention. I was reading not long ago cases about Muslims in our community who've been left homeless, brothers who are sleeping in their cars, who have lost jobs, single mothers who are trying to raise 2 kids but don't know where they're going to be sleeping tomorrow night. these are real issues, and that's just one or two. We've potentially got thousands.
What I would
them.
say, honestly, what I would say
Don't
in
we need to do
response to
something
that,
about that?
yeah, for sure. Like, no one's going to say, if you encounter an issue like that and someone asks you for money, you're not going to be like, sorry, got to keep my zakat local. Likewise, you shouldn't say, got to keep my zakat global. I'm not going to help anyone in my immediate environment. But I think if you were to take one position over the other, one of them would be a lot less problematic than the other. And that would be to help the Muslim lands which are suffering not from the loss of one home or a series of like an issue of homelessness which has occurred over the last couple of decades, but for them, homelessness is an endemic problem. Unemployment is an endemic problem that affects the majority sometimes of the population in countries, right, in the subcontinent, in Africa, right? Sometimes the unemployment rate's up to like 30, 40, 50%. It's crazy, right?
You know, it's ridiculous that we even have to talk about it in like, it's like a crude scale of like, who's worse off.
Yeah, it's of course,
it's
right?
so saddening. Like, but that's what we've got to think about.
But look, if I was to suggest a principle of my own, you know, I said I don't like the idea of keep your zakat local. I don't like that idea, right? But if I was to, I would say all of us have connections overseas.
Yeah, I think that's important. That's really important.
And we should use those connections to, like my dad, you know, growing up, he's always told me, I'm doing the growing up, he's doing the telling. But if he's always told me that, you know, not don't give to charities. He's given to charities himself, right? And he's set a very good example of a very hard to model example of giving to charities. But he's always said, for me, the first preference is always going to be relatives overseas or people that we know through connections overseas who are in dire circumstances. And it's almost a case of like literally go across yourself and give it, or give it to someone that you know is going to go and hand it over to the person.
Because that way you avoid all those other potential sticky situations of going through an organization and they have to adhere to
and not knowing about admin costs again, not casting any aspersions over, you know, Muslim charities or anything, but you know, there are question marks and people have, and they're allowed to ask questions.
Yeah, very valid question marks.
Admin fees, or, you know, issues to do with, you know, how much of the money is getting through, right, to the people. But also, you know, the fact that you just so much more trustworthy, just so much more reliant on the fact that, you know, I know exactly where my money is going. It's going through myself. It's going through
a lot more peace of mind in that kind of situation as well.
So yeah, I'd say that that would be something that I would bear in mind personally in terms of like a practical solution. And
I think even on the issue of local matters that we need to take care of, I think, look, again, not to at all put aside the need for real systemic change, but in our local communities, we need to, like, we fundraise a lot for like masajid and centers and so forth, and that's good. But sometimes we need other services, like those who are on the brink of homelessness, or, you know, single mothers, or people who've lost their jobs or whatever. We need more sort of community facilities and services that can address those things as well. So perhaps, you know, next time we're doing a fundraiser, let's make it about some of these community underlying issues as well, and address them more from that angle rather than, okay, we just need to give out funds, set up situations and circumstances that can assist them in more longer term ways. But obviously that's not to at all take away from the fact that overall the situation's only going to be altered significantly and permanently by proper change.
I think charities is, if I was to give it personally, I'm in no position to sort of lecture or anything, but it's just advice. It's like, we grew up in this community, we know our local charities, we know, like, we could name people who run local charities, we know them well, right? And it's not like we distrust these individuals, astaghfirullah, right? It's nothing like that. But if we were to like give a message, open message to some of these charities, I would say it's not right for a charity to willfully ignore the political problems because they're bound by a certain set of rules. And I think at the very least, I'm not saying, you know, close up shop and, you know, pack up your organization and go home. I'm saying start that conversation.
I remember.
Like, I would very much like for a charity to step out and advertise, have flyer saying, you know, the open Q&A on charities, and like open a question and answer and let the community have a conversation around how are you balancing this issue, right?
I remember some time ago, it's just vaguely popped into my mind, but it was about the Syria issue. There was one of the Muslim charities, one of the local Muslim charities, sent out a press release about how it was along the lines of, how it wasn't taking one side or the other. And it felt to me like they were just covering themselves. And I came with a printout of that statement, and I'd highlighted and underlined certain problematic parts of it. And I went into their office, and I just had a conversation with them. I said, look, I think this is deeply, deeply problematic. Like, and it was exactly what we were talking about, trying desperately to be apolitical, because at the end of the day, it affects their functioning. And so, you know, like you were saying, should you be able to give money, or should you be able to be political, one or the other, if you need to choose? Anyway, I sat down with them and I went through one by one, sentence by sentence, saying, look, this is the issue. This is, you know, your statement says this is incorrect. And, you know, Islamically, you've got to take a position against oppression from, you know, the wrongdoers and so forth, who are murdering, butchering, killing, slaughtering, all of that. You can't just be neutral about it. And that statement was like painfully neutral. And I sat down and look, credit where it's due, this organization took it well. And they had the discussion and they said, you're right, and so on and so forth. But, you know, perhaps we as a community can just, as you were saying, right, approach these organizations genuinely and sincerely to say, look, you're doing good work in terms of, you know, addressing some of the short-term issues, so on and so forth, but we got to be smarter about how we address things long-term.
For sure. I think charities sort of do these various drives collecting for tragedies like Yemen, Syria, Palestine, and other causes. But they sometimes have that tendency to ignore the political context that's caused that problem in the first place.
Yeah.
I think if we can try and just address that, I'm just trying to recap some of the points, takeaway points. If, you know, we can sort of try, charities should sort of try not to willfully ignore these political causes. And for us as just active members of the community, should maybe in a polite way hold some of these charities to account and say, look, advertise the work in the right way. You know, let's not talk about eliminating poverty. Let's not pacify populations by, you know, just addressing the short-term problem. Let's start to have some real conversations around it. And that's really it. In terms of giving, let's try and give. I think
keep giving.
Right,
keep
give,
giving.
But I think, I personally think, in my opinion, is that we should be giving through our connections over and above.
And look, often you can ask charity organizations, okay, show me the trail. Like, show me how it goes, where it goes. And look, sometimes they're more than happy to actually send you photos, videos, documents, everything, just to let you know that your money is going where you wanted it. But, you know, if you can't do a personal connection thing, then just go with what you know to be the most trustworthy, the one that's most transparent, the one that you can be
and if we leave you with one message, it will be, you know, at your next khutbah, when you hear a very powerful emotional speech about why you should empty out your pockets for the tragedies of the Muslim world, we just want you to have that conversation, firstly in your mind, but if you could have it with the brother
100%.
Who was giving that speech, and with some of the people in that masjid, don't be afraid to stand up and talk, right? Whether it's in a public manner or whether it's in a private manner, right? Private would probably be a good place to start having these conversations and say, not sure if there's a strong connection here between, you know, the money I'm giving here and eradicating poverty and solving the problems of the Muslim world. But, you know, subhanAllah, these are long-term issues. We definitely should be talking about them more, discussing them more, raising concerns with people in positions of power, of authority within the Muslim community. Inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can bless and again make us more charitable as Muslims, as human beings, and bless our efforts and raise our awareness and our political awareness to solve the problems in a long-term way. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and provide us with that shield to actually protect us in the long term with some of these problems. We'll leave it there, inshallah, if you have something to add to that.
My last thing would just be that it's always political. Just understand and know that it's always political. And that's what you got to go back to. And your money is not going to alter a political situation. The only thing that's going to alter that is public opinion, change of systems, change of procedures, alternate political realities.
Absolutely.
And that requires its own distinct work.
Absolutely.
So yes, give your charity, but understand that political problems are only solved politically.
Absolutely.
And I think we can leave it there. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you on our next episode of the podcast
in 2 weeks' time.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.